One of the biggest names in world football has just made a stunning confession about a former Celtic hero. We've also got a massive summer rebuild story breaking this morning, a huge manager debate heating up, and a contract decision that most Celtic fans are going to have a very strong opinion on. Loads to get into today, but first make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Celtic content. Chris Boyd has questioned whether keeping Martin O'Neill as Celtic manager permanently would hold the club back from the European ambitions they have been building towards over the last few years. It is a debate that has been coming since the moment O'Neill first walked back through the doors at Parkhead. The man rescued a completely fractured season, steadied the ship when everything was falling apart, and has now delivered a domestic double, the league title and the Scottish Cup. In one of the most chaotic campaigns in recent memory, the pressure from supporters to keep him is absolutely real. You can understand why. It has worked. The results have been there. The dressing room has responded to him in a way it simply did not respond to Wilfried Nancy. But Boyd is asking a harder question, and it is one the board cannot ignore. Under Ange Postecoglou and Brendan Rodgers, Celtic were very deliberately trying to build something in Europe. That unforgettable night in Munich, when Rodgers' side came seconds away from taking Bayern to extra time in a Champions League knockout game, felt like a genuine milestone. This season was a step backwards on that front. Celtic crashed out of the Champions League qualifiers against Kairat Almaty before later going out of the Europa League to VfB Stuttgart. Boyd said on Go Ballistic, Martin can't go on forever. That's just the reality of when you get older. But for the here and now, he's still having success. You look at Celtic, they were always wanting to progress to that next level. Does Martin allow them to do that? I'm not so sure. I think Martin can win domestically, but Celtic were obsessed there for a number of years, whether it was Ange Postecoglou, whether it was Brendan Rodgers. With progression in Europe, they wanted to improve there. That's not to say that Martin can't do it, but I get the feeling that if they're going to appoint Martin O'Neill, they're kind of going to wait for that model we're looking at. It is a genuinely important point. A domestic double is brilliant. Nobody is taking that away. But Celtic's stated ambition has always been about more than just Scotland. The board now have to decide whether O'Neill is the right man to take them to that next level, or whether the summer rebuild needs a different kind of vision at the top. Now, for the main story, as a major shake-up is coming at Celtic this summer, with four of the club's most recognisable names expected to lead a long list of departures from Parkhead as the rebuild begins in earnest. Journalist Stephen McGowan of the Herald reports that transfer planning is already well underway behind the scenes, and that Dyson Maeda, Reo Hatate, Arne Engels and Paulo Bernardo are all expected to spearhead what could be a very significant overhaul of the squad. Maeda's situation is perhaps the most bittersweet of the lot. The Japanese forward came inches away from leaving for Wolfsburg last summer before Celtic blocked the move because they could not sign a replacement in time. Since then, he has gone on to score in 7 consecutive matches during the title run-in, one of the most explosive finishing bursts in recent Celtic history. But with only a year left on his deal and Maeda openly talking about wanting to test himself at a higher level against top-level players, the expectation is now that he will move on. Engels is another name that will hurt. Celtic rejected 3 bids for the Belgian midfielder in January, with the final Nottingham Forest offer reportedly reaching around £25 million. The club held firm during the title race, but with the season now over, a bidding war is expected this summer. Paulo Bernardo barely featured in the second half of the campaign, made only 6 appearances in 2026, and was not involved in a single matchday squad after March. A summer exit looks almost inevitable. And then there is Reo Hatate, at his best, one of the most talented players Celtic have had in years, but inconsistency saw him lose his place during the defining weeks of the season. If this truly is the end of his time at Celtic, it would be a disappointing conclusion for a player who gave so much across multiple trophy-winning campaigns. In other news, a fascinating development is emerging around Sean Maloney that could give the clearest hint yet about which direction Celtic are heading with their managerial appointment this summer. Maloney played a huge role behind the scenes this season. He twice stepped into the coaching setup alongside O'Neill during his 2 interim spells, and the legendary manager was consistently and publicly generous in his praise for Maloney's tactical input and calmness when the pressure was at its highest. But a new report suggests Maloney has now been interviewed for Celtic's head of football operations role following the end of the season. That position was previously held by Paul Tisdale, whose time at the club drew fierce criticism from supporters, particularly around recruitment. The wider football structure implemented during that period was widely seen as a failure. Former Rangers defender Alan Hutton believes the development points towards Celtic bringing in a completely new manager this summer, with Maloney transitioning into a more senior, behind-the-scenes role. He said on Premier Sports Social Club, "If Sean's being interviewed by the club or speaking to the club about that sporting director role, then you'd think that's the direction they're going in. They're going to bring in a new manager and they want to keep Sean at the club. If Martin stays, I think Sean will be his number two. It's been a winning formula for them this season, so I don't see why you'd change it. So it all depends on Martin O'Neill and what he decides to do moving forward." Either way, Maloney is clearly now seen as a hugely important figure inside Celtic, regardless of what role he eventually takes up. The question of what O'Neill decides to do next will shape everything. In other news, Celtic are being urged to trigger the contract extension for Kelechi Iheanacho without hesitation, with the Nigerian striker having become one of the most important players in the club's domestic double success. Iheanacho arrived at Parkhead last September on a one-year deal, with Celtic holding an option to extend for a further 12 months. For much of the season, injuries and fitness issues limited his involvement, but as the campaign reached its defining moments, he transformed into one of Martin O'Neill's most trusted match winners. The goals he delivered during the run-in were not just important, they were decisive. The late winner at Dens Park, the stoppage time penalty against Motherwell, and the brilliant solo goal in the Scottish Cup final against Dunfermline. He has already said publicly that he wants to stay. The decision is now Celtic's to make. Former Scotland international Alan Hutton was clear about what the answer should be, saying on Premier Sports Social Club, "I would extend his deal. He's come into the club, not been playing a lot of football, had injuries throughout the season. You could tell he wasn't right when he first signed. His technical ability has always been there. You can see that. We know what he's capable of. His impact in games, he's scored goals, important goals. If you were to give him another deal financially, if it's good for the club and it's good for the player, I think it's a no-brainer." Lastly, Pep Guardiola has made a stunning confession, admitting that one of the biggest regrets of his entire managerial career was not giving former Celtic goalkeeper Joe Hart a proper chance at Manchester City. Guardiola brought the curtain down on his Manchester City tenure at the weekend after a decade in charge that completely transformed English football. Despite missing out on the Premier League title this season to Arsenal, his legacy at the club is extraordinary. But in an emotional farewell interview with Sky Sports, it was a former Celtic hero who unexpectedly surfaced as his most painful regret. Hart's career famously unravelled after Guardiola arrived at City and moved him aside almost immediately. The keeper eventually rebuilt his reputation and career years later at Celtic under Ange Postecoglou, becoming one of the most beloved figures of that era. His mentality, his leadership, and his genuine connection with the fan base made him far more than just a goalkeeper at Parkhead. That connection clearly still burns today, with Hart spotted celebrating among Celtic supporters at away matches this season, including at Ibrox. And Guardiola, in one of the most candid moments of his long farewell, could not hold back. He said, "I want to confess something. I have regrets. When you take a lot of decisions, a lot of decisions, you make mistakes. But there is one regret that I have hidden deep inside for many years. I didn't give Joe Hart the chance to be with me, to prove how good a goalkeeper he was. And I should have done. With all respect to Claudio Bravo and then Edison who came in, he was important. But in that moment I should have thought, okay Joe, let's try to do it together. If it doesn't work, then we change it. But it happened. In life, sometimes you have to take decisions, and sometimes I'm not fair enough." For Celtic supporters, those words will only deepen the warmth already felt towards Joe Hart. Guardiola himself is now saying what many already knew: Hart was more than good enough, and Celtic were lucky to get him. That's all the latest Celtic news for today. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'll see you in the next one.